If you are traveling to Iceland, you are in for a treat. The diverse, unspoiled landscape will leave you in awe. And one of the best ways to see this incredible scenery is through renting a car. And most every city and town are going to have companies where you can rent your cars from, but there are some very small towns where they might not have many options, and there might be a good reason to book that rental car early in advance, especially if you're going to be there in the high season of summer. I've got some other great driving tips when you are in Iceland, so stay tuned and I'm going to share with you what those are. We are Dennis and Min. Come join us on our traveling adventures around the world. All right, before we get into driving tips in Iceland, we appreciate you liking and subscribing to our channel and this video so we can continue to grow our channel. So Iceland is an amazing country. It's not a very huge country, but the roads are great, and we have some important tips that we wanted to pass along to you on your next visit to Iceland. First of all, from an American perspective, you're going to be happy to know that you're going to be driving on the same side of the road as they do in the US. Also, the steering wheel is going to be on the same side of the car. So that should be very familiar to you. No worries about that. Do know that some of these smaller towns, again, outside of Reykjavik, which is the capital, the big city there in Iceland, a lot of these smaller cities and towns have 1,000 people, 2,500 people. So they do offer rental cars, but they're not going to be a lot. So where there's not a lot of competition, the prices tend to be higher, right? But just note that when you go to Iceland, bring some money because it's an expensive country. Everything is going to be costing more for the most part. Renting a car is not going to be any different. We pay between $100 and $150 per day. So we did this when we were on a cruise ship. So we stopped at different ports and rented a car just for the day. And on one occasion, we had this wonderful mother and her two adult children that joined us. So they were happy enough to share in that cost of the rental car. So divide by 4, divided by 5, you have the whole day to use this car. It's really not too bad when you think of it in that way. So a couple of things to note that when you are driving in Iceland, tip number one is there are a lot of tunnels. So if you're not used to driving in tunnels, just note that they're there, and some of them are very long. I think the longest is maybe 6 to 7 miles long, and some of them are just one lane. And so you've got cars coming from opposite directions, and so that might freak you out a little bit when you see these headlights coming towards your car in this dark tunnel. They are lit for the most part in most places from what I recall, but there are going to be places where you can pull off to the side to let another car pass. So don't worry about that. You will be able to get through, but eventually you will get let out of this tunnel. But they're just going through these mountains that are pretty big. But just note that you're going to see these tunnels when you're driving in Iceland. Second tip when driving in Iceland is you are going to note that there are some animals such as sheep and maybe some goats and maybe some deer that sometimes will congregate on the road. So just be careful if you're coming around a bend. Always be mindful that there could be some creature there to greet you. And so you want to be careful. That's a potential hazard. All right, so beware of that. And the next driving tip when driving in Iceland is that the weather. Now, if you're going to be there in the winter months or even the shoulder seasons in the spring and the fall, it can still be very cold, but also icy, snowy. So obviously you have to be prepared for those conditions. But in the summer months, you don't have to worry about the roads being impaired in any way like that. But do note that if you are in a rental car, for example, it is going to be tempting to go off of the paved road. So first of all, when you look at most rental contracts, they do not allow you to be off of a road. So driving on dirt roads is not allowed. And so there's some areas where it might be, I don't know, like just dirt or grass, and that ground, for all you know, could be very, very wet. It could be saturated, and you might get stuck, and that won't be good. So another reason to stay on the roads. But again, the rental companies will not like you driving off of the pavement. So keep that in mind. And the next tip when driving in Iceland is that it's very remote outside of Reykjavik, and it can be long distances. Between towns, you don't see anything. I mean, there's nothing but nature, and it's gorgeous that way. But you're not going to see any buildings. You're not going to see any restaurants. You're not going to see any people. And so you want to be prepared. So definitely take some bottled water with you, some snacks, and make sure you have enough petrol in your car to get you to your destination and back. Okay, because it might be a while before you get to the next petrol station. And the next tip when driving in Iceland is the weather. So if you're going to be there in the summertime, it still gets cold. Be sure, like if you're us coming off of a cruise ship and renting a car, be prepared. Bring a jacket, bring some warm clothing, because you might be comfortable when you get off of the ship and it might be fine, but then where you're driving to could be very different microclimate. It could get very, very windy. The weather can change on a dime there. So it could be nice and warm and sunny 1 minute, and then 20 minutes later, it can be a complete downpour and strong winds. And so you just want to be prepared for that. And so make sure that you dress warm as well, in addition to bringing water and food with you when you are driving. All right, the next tip when driving in Iceland is do not park on the street, on the road, on the highway. It's going to be very tempting. You're going to see these spectacular scenery and mountains and waterfalls, and you're going to want to just park the car and just get out and take some pictures. And you're going to think that's okay, because unlike other areas where you rent cars and drive, maybe you haven't seen a car for miles and miles and miles. Well, chances are if you park on the road, that's when a car is going to come from either direction. So just be mindful, pull over. A lot of these roads do have shoulders, at least pull over under the shoulder. But if you have another area where you can safely park your car for some time that's not going to be mud, where you're going to get stuck, for example, just look for a place that's going to be safe to pull over, get your pictures, get your video, and then get back on the road. Now, I will say that there is going to be some stark differences between renting a car in Iceland and taking a tour bus that guides you through these popular sites. There's pros and cons with each. Again, when you're on a guided tour bus, for example, they will stop at all the places that you need to see, but they're not going to just pull over when you say, hey, I want to get a picture of this. Can you pull? They're not going to stop, right? So that's the freedom that you have when you rent a car. And when you're going into the northern part, especially of Iceland, it's pretty remote. And so even though there are guided tour buses that take you around, to me, we liked having the freedom of having our own car, driving in the northern part, which is very rural. And then when we were outside of Reykjavik, we did a guided bus tour. And there was a lot more going on in that area, which I was grateful for, having a tour guide to explain the things that we're seeing. And so I think that's more important, especially in the areas in and around Reykjavik in the southern part of the island of Iceland. So just note that there's going to be some trade-offs there. When you have your own car, you're renting, you're going to have that freedom, but yet you're going to have all the knowledge and information coming from an experienced tour guide on these bus tours as well that you don't get when you're renting a car. So keep that in mind when you consider renting a car over there in Iceland. So I hope that information was helpful on how to drive in Iceland. Enjoy your time there, and please like and subscribe to our channel, and we will see you again. Happy traveling.